Go ahead and get started. Good morning, Brandon Oaks. We're really pleased to have you, all our audience today, with our Reflections program. This is the second, third this year, and we look forward to each Friday or once a month, the third Friday, of having reflections throughout the year. We've got a great lineup ahead of us, and we really appreciate Vern Danielsen sharing with us today. It's a good way to get to know your neighbor. Vern and Carol, his wife, they moved into Pine Ridge in April of last year, just in time to get all the restrictions from the pandemic, which has kept all of us pretty well tied down, except that with all the restrictions, that Vern and Carol both have carved a very contributing place into our community. Well, both are longtime residents of Roanoke. Vern graduated from Purdue University with an electrical engineering degree, and he remains a proud Boilermaker. He received his MBA from Virginia Commonwealth University not too many years ago. Well, I first met Vern in the wood shop, and he is a master craftsman. I also had occasion to learn a bit about him as we had casual conversations in the wood shop. First, he was smart enough to marry Carol. Next, he's a creative and precision woodworker. If he weren't a woodworker, he'd be a good dentist. He has a very inquiring mind. He has a keen intellect. He has a fine sense of humor. Witness his kilt that he wore on St. Patrick's Day. He upholds a traditional gentleman's attire. He's the only guy I've ever met that wears iron shirts into the wood shop. Well, I look forward to his talk, learning more about Vern and his background. So let's enjoy now getting to know our neighbor. Vern, all yours.
Thanks, Buster. And I'll point out that Buster wrote that introduction. I hope that I can live up to all of those things. As Buster said, Carol and I moved into Pine Ridge on April 3rd last year, and we've enjoyed being here. We've gotten to know a lot of people here, and are really happy at Brandon Oaks. It was the right decision at the right time. A little bit of my history, and I've had a wide-ranging career. And some have said that it's just Vern can't hold a steady job. I was born in St. Charles, Illinois in 1940, so I'm a little over 80 years old. I went to a Catholic grade school, and while I love music, I was the only boy in 7th and 8th grade that was not required to be in the boys' choir. So that tells you a little bit about my singing capability. I was fortunate to have two role models, my father and my uncle. They were best friends, and so I was fortunate to really have two fathers. They taught me. They were my mentors. They taught me ethics. They taught me how to be organized. They taught me how to get things done, and introduced me to electronics. At a very early age, I knew that I wanted to be an electronics engineer. I built my first radio, a crystal set, as a Cub Scout in the 1940s, and you should see a picture of that. All right. There's a picture of the blueprint and the instructions for that crystal set, and that is the actual crystal set radio that I built, and it occupies a treasured spot on my desk right now. And Teresa, you can minimize that. I was always interested in a lot of different things in my life. And if you remember the commercial for a new cereal, his brothers and sisters said, "Give it to Mikey, he'll eat it." Well, it was kind of, if you want something new done, give it to Vern, he'll do it. I went to a military high school. I had a calling. I felt a calling to the military. And while I was in high school, I was the captain of a national championship rifle team. We were national champions for 2 years while I was there. And again, I enjoyed doing a wide variety of things, but Latin was not one of those things. I didn't do well in Latin, almost failed it, and almost did not graduate on time because of it, but I found a way to do that. Bought my first car in 1958, a 1949 Chevrolet, and I remember that car well. As I said, I wanted to be an electronics engineer, so I chose Purdue University. I went to Purdue from 1958 to 1962, and I majored in electronics, communications, and computers, as much as you could do that at that time of our technical development. I worked on my first computer system in 1958. The electrical engineering department had a computer that was about the size of a large desk, and it had 1K of memory. And it had less processing power than a Hallmark card that sings to you today. I also had ideas about being an astronaut. Purdue had a great record of putting people in the astronaut program. Neil Armstrong was a Purdue graduate, but I found out that only test pilots were astronauts at that time, so that killed that idea. I was in the ROTC, Signal Corps, which made sense for an electronics guy. I was a distinguished military graduate, which gave me a regular Army commission, and I again continued anticipating being a career Army officer. I was in the Army Signal Corps for 7 years, from 1962 to 1969, and 2 years in the 82nd Airborne Division. You may recognize that patch. And Teresa, we got that maximized, I hope. I jumped out of airplanes. I had 32 jumps while I was in the 82nd Division. One of those training jumps, there were 27 airplanes in a formation that was less than 10 seconds long, and it takes about 30 seconds for 60 people to jump out of an airplane. So within less than a minute, we had 1,500 troopers in the air over a span of about 2 miles. The objective of an airborne unit is to get as many soldiers on the ground ready to fight in as short a period of time as possible. In the 82nd, I was part of the Department of Defense Strategic Force, which consisted of the 82nd Airborne Division, the 101st Airborne Division, which is now Air Mobile, the 1st Armored Division, the 4th Infantry Division, and the 1st Infantry Division. A total of over 50,000 soldiers in the Army who were on call and ready to be deployed anywhere in the world within hours or days. There were 3 times that I was sitting on an airplane with live ammunition in my rifle and a parachute strapped to my back, ready to take off. And fortunately, the president called off the incursion, and we didn't go. But one that was probably the closest was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The 82nd was at Key West, Florida, ready to go. And we would probably have taken boats across those 90 miles because there weren't airstrips capable of airplanes to take off for us to jump. After the 82nd, I was in Germany for 3 years, and I was the officer in charge of a state-of-the-art data communication system. And at that time, in 1964, high-speed data was 1.2 kilobits. Today, we talk about megabits and gigabits in data communication speed. But at that point, we were talking about just over 1,000 bits per second as a high-speed data communications link. We used off-the-shelf commercial electronics. We had no military equipment because military equipment hadn't been developed to do that at that time. I had 26 stations, communication stations throughout southern Germany. We provided logistical communication. We transmitted supply transactions for all of the Army units in Germany. and that was the largest data communications network in the Department of Defense at that time. I left the Army left Germany after 3 years and went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, where I was officer in charge of the comm center school. After having operated a communications operation like that, I knew a lot about communication centers. So they made me in charge of the comm center school to train officers and enlisted people on how to operate a comm center. I was also in charge of the post data processing center. After a year at Fort Gordon, I went to Vietnam for a year. I was at the Vietnam headquarters, responsible for all non-voice strategic communications from division level up, and also all cryptographic equipment and systems for the entire country. I had one of the highest security clearances in the Army at that time. I was responsible for communications links to Japan, Okinawa, Hawaii, and to the Pentagon, and that included a special communications link between the president and the commanding general of the Army in Vietnam. So if the president wanted to send a message directly to the president, that message came to my communications center. I was one of a dozen people who was on call 24 hours a day to receive that message and personally deliver it to the commanding general. At the end of the year, in my year in Vietnam, I would have been assigned to the Pentagon in the Worldwide Strategic Communications Network, but I wasn't looking forward to more tours in Vietnam or Korea. That just wasn't part of my career plan, so I resigned my commission. I was recruited as a management consultant for then Alexander Grant and Company. You may recognize what is now Grant Thornton. I was with them for 7 years. I was the manager of the consulting practice in the Chicago office, which was the largest office in the firm. And I realized that in a partnership, like a public accounting firm, that you don't get to the top of that organization without being a partner. And you can't be a partner unless you have a certified public accountant designation. So I went back to school and passed the CPA exam. That gave me a combination of communications, computers, and added to that financial analysis. So that gave me a pretty good bag of tools and expanded my horizons. I was part of the development of computer-oriented audit procedures for Alexander Grant. And if you think about what businesses were doing in the early 1980s, in the 1970s, early 1970s, they were computerizing management systems, manufacturing, inventory control, and accounting and bookkeeping systems. And those had to be audited, and the auditing firm had to have computer procedures in order to do that. And I was part of the development of those first procedures. But then the entrepreneurial bug bit. And in 1975, another gentleman and I had an opportunity to buy a business here in Roanoke, which is what brought me to Roanoke in 1975. That business was A.B. Dick Products of Roanoke. And Albert Blake Dick, if you can see the picture of the mimeograph machine here, invented the mimeograph machine. And in the at that time, 60s and 70s, virtually every church in the country had a mimeograph machine for printing their Sunday church bulletin. It was a big part of our business, but with copy machines and advancing technology, this business was on its way out. And so we added to that business and became a supplier of printing equipment, supplies, typesetting, and graphics to Instaprint shops like Sir Speedy, Swift Print, Curry Copy, and in-house print shops like they had at the Railroad, Virginia Western Community College, and other places like that. But after 6 years there, my health deteriorated. I had health problems, and I needed to change my life. I sold my share of the business back to my partner and went to work for Hayes C. Mattern & Mattern, one of the largest architecture engineering firms on the East Coast. They wanted it to get into the communications engineering business. So I started the communications practice there with microwave, the design of microwave and telephone systems. That grew to two-way radio for police, fire, and emergency medical services, 911 centers, and emergency operations centers. We did statewide law enforcement systems, radio systems for Virginia, Florida, Louisiana, and others, many cities and counties around the country. It was a big part of Hayes Mattern and Mattern's business, and one of the most profitable. We also did projects for the federal government, and for instance, the Department of Justice, which was classified system. The largest project that we did while I was there was for the state of Virginia, and was a statewide two-way radio system for all of the law enforcement agencies at the state. At that time, there were 21 departments at the state that had law enforcement responsibilities. Now, of course, you had state police, but in addition to state police, you had Department of Motor Vehicles, you had ABC that had law enforcement officers. The Department of Motor Vehicles had law enforcement officers, Game and Fish. So there were 21 agencies with a law enforcement responsibility, and this radio system provided service to all of them. It was the largest single contract that Hayes Mattern and Mattern had ever received at that time. It was a $20 million fee for management and implementation of that system. It resulted in a Motorola radio contract for $500 million. As a kind of a side note, I was also on the team, played a small part of the team that was responsible for the renovation of the Pentagon at that time. During that time, I met Carol in Baltimore, and we've been married for 36 years. Also during that time, I met an interesting person who was also involved in radio systems, except he called them cell phone systems. Cellular phones are radios. And so we met at professional seminars and so on. Gentleman's name was Mark Warner. I worked in Mark Warner's first campaign for Senate, which he didn't win, but did very well. It was a campaign for the Senate seat then held by John Warner, no relation. Mark's second major campaign was for governor, which he won. We were very close, and I played a big part in both of those campaigns. And as a result of my knowledge of wholesale, retail, finance, and management, he appointed me to be chairman of Alcoholic Beverage Control. You certainly recognize that logo. I participated in the decision not to change from state-owned and operated systems to the privatized system. I did a study for over 6 months looking at statistics about privately operated systems versus state-operated systems, and came to the conclusion and made the recommendation that Virginia stay state-operated. And that was based on statistics on public safety, public health, and of course, profit. State-operated systems have much better statistics, much lower statistics for DUI, alcoholism, fetal alcohol syndrome, all of the bad things caused by overconsumption of alcohol. Public safety, there are more crimes committed under the influence of alcohol, and of course, profit. While I was there, the department increased its number of stores from 265 to 305. Gross revenue rose from approximately 500 million gross to $250 million in profit and taxes. So big money. There were those who recommended that the ABC enforcement operation be transferred to state police. And I worked very closely with a gentleman by the name of Steve Flaherty, who was superintendent of state police. And Steve made it be known that if he were to be responsible for the enforcement of alcoholic beverage regulations and profit, he would keep a separate department, because those regulations and laws are so much different than what the regular state police officers are used to enforcing. And he really didn't want that responsibility. Currently, ABC grosses $1.2 billion from its spirits sale business, and 545 million of that is contributed to the general fund in taxes and profit, and they now operate 388 stores. Beverage alcohol is a big business. As Buster said in the introduction, during that time, I attended Virginia Commonwealth University and got my MBA. It was the executive MBA program, which was for people with experience in business. And at that time, I was the oldest person to have graduated from that program. There may be somebody older since that time, but most of my fellow students were younger than my children. So I went after the governor's term ended at 4 years, so did mine. And I went back to Hayes C. Mattern and opened an office in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Hayes C. had several projects in Fredericksburg at that time and needed an office there. They had an engineer and project manager who was fully capable of managing the project, but they needed an office manager to hire people, get new projects, and so on. And so Hayes C. Mattern decided to let Mikey do it or let Vern do it. At any rate, I became the office manager and built the Fredericksburg office in the time period from 2006 to 2010. I retired in 2010, and as I said, I've always had broad interests. I had entrepreneurial desires, which is what brought me to Roanoke in the first place. Over my career, in addition to the things that I've talked about, I started 3 businesses and had an ownership position in one more. And one of my, I'll say one of the things I'm most proud of is our son's Eric business, which is All Star Impressions. You may have seen that logo. You may know Eric's business. He produces trophies, awards, signs, recognition, materials. He's been in that business for 26 years, more than 26 years. And Carol and I were a major part in helping him to get that business started with management training, management advice, and we were also his angels for the first 3 or 4 years to help him get started. So that was, I'll say, the professional part or the of my career. But I also have a lot of hobbies. I jumped out of airplanes for 2 years, and I thought it might be interesting to fly them. So I went to flight school, and I have over 500 hours of instrument-rated, complex, single-engine land flying. This is a Cherokee 180. There were 5 of us that owned an airplane like this together. Also love classic British sports cars. This is an Austin Healey 3000, a 1966. Which is the prime of the stable. This is an Austin Healey Bug-Eye Sprite, and it's not hard to see why it's called a Bug-Eye. It's a 1960 model and is more fun to drive than anything else you can do with your clothes on. It is just an absolutely wonderful thing and a great toy. Classic, this is a 1952 MGTD, which was the first sports car loved by America. As Buster said, I like to do wood turning. I like to take big pieces of wood and make little pieces of wood out of them and leave all kinds of shavings on the floor. I like to do pepper mills, some of which look like this or like this. And I do platters, cheese platters, with a little bit of humor along with that. And the piece on the left is it's a box. The lid comes off, and for wood turners, anything that has a lid that comes off is a box. That lid comes off, but if you look at it carefully, you can see that it's a triangular shape, which takes a little bit of extra effort and is a lot of fun to do. All right, you can minimize that. I also enjoy clay target shooting, skeet, trap, and sporting clays. I do some sporting clay shooting now, and I have a good friend in Roanoke that stores my guns for me because I can't have them here. I love Formula One automobile racing as a spectator, but there was a time where I was a tech inspector for road racing cars about 30 years ago. But Formula One racing, international Formula One, is just an absolute passion for me. I love to watch those races. And if any of you are into Formula One, get a hold of me and we got things to talk about. I flew radio control model airplanes, drones. Don't do that any longer because I couldn't bring them here. Don't have a place to put them. Model railroad, it has substantial model railroad layout that also had to go away in downsizing to come here. I like to read. I read 2 to 4 books a month, belong to the St. John's Episcopal Church Book Club, and enjoy reading with those people. I'm currently president of the local branch of the English Speaking Union. So it's been a good run. I've worked for, oh golly, probably 50 years. If I count my first job as a newspaper carrier, probably 70 years of the 80 that I've walked the face of this earth. But I still have a lot of interests. And I like to say that I've got a to-do list that just goes on. And if I'm going to finish that to-do list, I'm going to have to live to be 250 years old. So that kind of wraps it up. I'm sorry. Here's another picture. You probably saw this picture of my wood turning stuff in the display cabinet in the main lobby some time ago. But if you have questions, give Buster Jones a call at 2229, and he'll pass those on to me. If you have questions, please do that. I'll be here for until there are no more questions or until you get tired of looking at me.
Vern, that was fantastic. I know most of us are aware there's 24 hours in a day, but I think you've managed to put 30 to 36 in every day. And good night. You have had such a broad background and experience. And I suspect that Ben Birch has been taking notes and you're going to get called on for something or another.
Buster, I want to say something else. Sorry for interrupting. If something I forgot to say that I want to add here, as a result of being in the airborne division and a paratrooper, I'm probably the only person that you folks know that has ever climbed down from a tree without first having climbed up.
All right. And I'm also surprised in just looking at you as everything you've done in your background, you're very chipper and spry for a guy that must be 150 years old. Fantastic. Any calls or chat box? What a great reflection we've had from Vern Danielsen today.
Yeah, I don't see anything in the chat box.
Nope, and nor is my phone ringing off the wall. And I trust that electronically you have arranged for the aurora borealis in your background. It's been a pleasure, Vern, for me, for the Reflections program, and I guarantee you for our audience. Thank you, Teresa, for setting us up with technology today. And I reckon that's it for another Reflections program.